We kick off another day with Swiss punctuality, paying tribute to a Swiss figure, from corruption to the amusing silence. Yet later, he became a naturalized Frenchman, truly French in many respects. But let me tell you, the difficult part is already behind us. The challenge was talking about myself, Van der Rohe, an architect so dry, so rough, so repetitive. Someone who always said, "You don't have to invent architecture every morning." Someone whose favorite phrase was for his students. From Chicago, "Do it again, do it once more." And his own work is a series of "do it again, do it once more." Faced with the act of driving, it's very easy for me to tell you about driving because he is an artist, and I deliberately call him an artist, not an architect. So polyphonic, so grand, so overflowing that the challenge has been to condense it into an hour and a bit more. I'm afraid I'll always abuse your time in the end. Le Corbusier. For many, the Picasso of architecture, and like Picasso, equally plural with different eras, different faces, different artistic person that will unfold on the screen before you. All these artistic individuals begin in the Yuga Enchelephant, where they were born in 1887 in a province, in an almost marginal place. With a watchmaking industry, everyone in his family had been watch engravers, and they hoped he would lead them out as well, and that young man, many years later, would be honored by his country. By having him featured on banknotes, the Swiss have not yet adopted the euro. So when you visit Switzerland, you can verify that indeed Le Corbusier is still on the banknotes. Feel free to keep some as souvenirs. He is born into a Calvinist family, a hardworking family, and a family with incredibly close ties. Here they are, the four of them: the father, a watch engraver; the mother, Marie Charlotte Amélie, born Perret, a music teacher; the older brother, Albert; and finally, our character, Jacques Edward Yaneg, because, as you know, Le Corbusier was a nickname that he would later adopt, much later. At the age of 33, but in this family image, you have incorporated the intimate story of the character. His ties with his family were so close that he wrote a weekly letter to his mother throughout his life. His mother, who lived almost to 100, passed away at the age of 99, just 5 years before him. So, the bond with her was extraordinary, and a significant part of Corbusier's career is understood through this connection with his mother and the desire to win her over because, of course, the mother was a music teacher, and her favorite was the eldest, Albert, who was also a musician. They have placed themselves in the younger brother, who was engaged in something else, and he, always seeking recognition from his mother. Well, this young man is going to continue the family trade. He draws well and enters a school of arts and crafts, where he stumbles upon extraordinary luck. A teacher, the one you see here, takes a liking to him and quickly discovers his talent. This teacher would not only be his mentor, but also his protector during the first stage of his life. It's true, they quickly realize that the boy has weak eyesight and must soon abandon the work of engraving watches, which is very difficult because it has to be done with a magnifying glass. It's a job for a miniaturist, not easy at all. They redirect him towards other things, in this case, towards decorative arts. Le Platini had his own ideas. He was a follower of Raskin and was fascinated by creating, in that world of alpine truth, the Yuga high in the Swiss mountains, a utopia, an outpost. Something that, starting from the firs and the nature of the high mountain, could convey spiritual values, and he does this by geometricizing nature. This is the young Le Corbusier, drawing under the guidance of Le Platini, a geometrized nature inspired by the pine, something that would serve, let's say, for decoration, but also in the long run to conceive his architecture. And when he is still a lad, Le Platini manages to get him a commission, arranges for him to be commissioned for a house. And the young Charles Edward, along with his colleagues, he builds this, which is his first house. As you can see, it has little Corbusian appearance, and later, it didn't make it into the complete works. But with the fees from that house, he set out to see the world. With a companion, he traveled through Italy, 2 months exploring Italy, almost 20 cities. And above all, it's very interesting. He draws what he sees, but primarily focusing on decorative arts. The architect is not yet fully present. Only the lover of decoration is there. Here you see him drawing the baptistery in Siena, focusing mainly on details and decoration. He doesn't yet see the mass, the volume. He's not yet the architect. He only sees the surfaces. The journey continues. After the trip to Italy, Le Platini had said, "Now, where things are happening is in Vienna. Go to Vienna." And he spends 4 months in Vienna, during which he designs 2 houses by mail. This one you see here, the Stadtzer, and another one, both in Chaux-de-Fonds, both in his village, and both clients who were relatives or friends of Le Platini. So, Le Platini continued to protect him, getting him commissions, and from Vienna he executed them by mail, sending the drawings. He didn't like Vienna. When he left, he spoke of the prison of Vienna, the horror of Vienna. He tried to establish relationships with Ulbrich, with Wagner, with the great architects, but it didn't work out. He didn't feel comfortable in that vibrant atmosphere. So he sought another place and continued on to Paris. In Paris, among other things, since he was a French speaker, spoke his own language, he felt more comfortable. And in addition, he found who would be, after Le Platini, his great mentor. Here he is with his brother Albert, with whom he still had a very close relationship. They were together, sharing a house, as you can see, in front of Notre Dame in Paris, showing this young Le Corbusier who is starting to live a somewhat bohemian life. He dresses like a bohemian from Montmartre. But the important thing is how he discovers his second mentor. Auguste Perret was a great French architect who mainly developed the introduction of reinforced concrete in housing. This is one of Perret's works where he had his own studio. Immediately, the young Yaneg asks for a job, and Perret gives it to him. Le Platini had directed him towards Perret, telling him to go see this gentleman who is doing interesting things. He asks for a job and he gets it. For many months he works in Perret's studio, learning from a master of architecture and, moreover, a master with a will for technical innovation because of reinforced concrete. This structure you see here, they say, well, it has a particular video. Well, it has particular features. For example, notice how it's made with a reinforced concrete structure that is embedded in the factory, but suddenly, at the end, you see it emerge. It's not a load-bearing wall. It's a structure of reinforced concrete frames. This was an extraordinary novelty at the time, and Perret makes Le Corbusier see that architecture is more than decoration, more than decorative arts, more than geometricizing nature to achieve this condition. He is a restless young man, and soon after he continues his pilgrimage to another center of creation at that time, Berlin. Before or after, one had to go to Berlin. At that moment, in 1910, almost all the protagonists of our story converge in Berlin. Why? Because he goes to the studio of Behrens, the author of the AEG we have mentioned here, and he asks for a job. Behrens gives him a job. At that moment, they are working with Behrens. Mies van der Rohe, Gropius, and Frank Lloyd Wright is also there in the city of Berlin. Working with Washmood, the editor of the famous Washmood Portfolio, who had come fleeing from America and settled in Berlin to pursue his endeavors. So, at that moment, in 1910, over 100 years ago in Berlin, you have Mies, Gropius, and Le Corbusier, all working for Behrens, and Frank Lloyd Wright very close by. However, while the relationship between Mies and Gropius is very close, and we know it well, there is no documentary trace between Mies, Gropius, and Le Corbusier. Neither Mies nor Gropius mention anything about Le Corbusier, and vice versa. Yet, they were working in the same office. Le Corbusier hated 20 people, saying, "We are 20 slaves working for this man who just wants to get rich. He takes on more work than he can handle, and then he doesn't pay attention." He hated barons. So, the Berlin experience had to end, and it ended in a grand style with the Orient Journey. Along with Clipston, Augusto Clipston, another friend decides to embark on a long journey. Clipston was working on a thesis about El Greco and had to go to Budapest. They said, "Well, since you're going to Budapest, I'll go with you and then we'll continue until Istambul." Here, take a look at the magnificent Süleymaniye Mosque, a work by Sinan, the great Turkish Renaissance architect. Le Corbusier draws it, and suddenly he discovers the East. Not only the architectural East, but also a fascination with that romantic world that we have always seen from the West with fascination and fear. And being the enthusiast he is for costumes, here you see him with his friend Clipston dressed as a woman in Pera, the European district of Istanbul. From there, they proceed to Greece. Because any architect has to pass through the Acropolis and see the Parthenon. And he takes a photograph with one of the great columns of the Parthenon, with its large pieces of Pentelic marble. The silhouette of the architect, which you can see here, was too illuminated. But anyway, that silhouette you see here is meant to give us the scale, to show how colossal this Greek architecture is, which also serves as the measure of his own ambitions. He returns to his beloved Italy and to his beloved Pisa. Pisa had always been his favorite city. Here you can see one of his drawings from that time. Compare it to the previous ones. When he passes through Italy before, it was only decorative. Now, he draws the baptistery, the Duomo, and the cemetery of Miraculous in Pisa. His architecture is already there in the presence of volumes, the Mass. The architect is here, ready to flourish. And he flourishes in Chaux-de-Fonds, his village. He returns after his long itinerary, his long journey through the East to his Swiss village high in the mountains. He opens his office with great credentials, saying, "Changzi Douan Le Corbusier. I have worked with Perret, with barons, so I know Viennese architecture." And he puts up the sign. But he doesn't have many clients, as is often the case with architects. The first client ends up being his own family. So, this is the Villa Savoye that he builds for his parents. You can already see that those first houses he had made, sometimes by mail, with that regional style, transform into something more refined, more austere, with fewer unnecessary details. This is the house he builds for his parents, spectacular, stately, a grand villa. They, being a modest income family, were ruined by it. They spent years paying for the house, and in the end, they couldn't afford it. They had to move somewhere else. A disaster. He felt guilty for the rest of his life for having ruined his parents by embarking them on the adventure of building this grand mansion. Yet, he already judged this mansion to be worthy of his genius because he began to see a desire to distance himself from the teachings of his mentor, Le Platini, to move away from that more picturesque world, the Alpine folklore. He wanted to incorporate elements of classicism, a classicism for the Yuga, as he called it, evoking the book of a character who would also become his mentor, a couple, Otto Wagner and his partner, who would become an extraordinary source of knowledge for us because Le Corbusier corresponded with them for many years. They were a Swiss homosexual couple who had decided to openly live as a couple and had gone to Germany to be able to do so. They were older than him, but he established a relationship of absolute trust with them through letters. Ritter is still one of the major sources of knowledge about the person because we know the architect well. He left thousands of drawings and sketches, but we know the person less, and we mainly have three sources of knowledge: the letters, the mother I mentioned earlier, the letters to Ritter, and in third place, the letters to an American lover he had intermittently for almost 30 years. Since they only saw each other on one side or the other of the Atlantic, things were complicated. While they were apart, they wrote letters. So he wrote many letters, and those letters tell us what we know about him today and can share with you. After the house for his parents, he built a larger house for a prominent industrialist in the city who judged him favorably as he began to manifest that classicist condition he wanted to introduce into the world of the Yuga. Don't forget, I'm saying it now, and I'll repeat it several times until it bores you. The perhaps greatest modern architect was also a great classical architect. His obsession was not only for the Acropolis. He had an engraving of the Acropolis on his work table. Not just his obsession with the classical world, but also his desire to reinterpret classicism with modern means runs like a red thread through all his work. Here you can see how he tries to introduce classical architecture into that world of Alpine folklore. And then the war comes, the War of 14. He was a Swiss citizen and Switzerland was neutral. He wasn't mobilized. But suddenly, he sees how his dream falls apart. He had dreamt of combining French refinement with German efficiency. He had been to Paris and Berlin and thought, what the world needs is to bring together these two worlds, these two attitudes toward architecture and life. And suddenly, he sees France and Germany embroiled in a dramatic, cruel war, a war of trenches, mud, and blood that exterminated the youth of Europe. Today, we may not fully realize how the First World War of 1418 was a monumental event. It changed the world, dismantled the old regime, and nothing was the same afterward. The position of women, the relationship between the young and the old, the entire old regime collapsed in those muddy trenches of the war. As an architect, he then starts thinking about reconstruction. There will be a need to build a lot as the wars are destroying many things. And he invents a system to rebuild the world devastated by the First World War. He calls it the Domino system, which is a play on words. On one hand, it comes from domus, which means house in Latin, and on the other hand, domino, because as you can see, it has the small piece that he had drawn with about 6 dots, representing the 6 pillars. I've enlarged this image because it's almost an ideogram of Le Corbusier's architecture, and many may say, but it looks like just a house under construction. What's special about it? What's special is that, for the first time, Le Corbusier reduces architecture to nothing more than a floor slab and nothing more than a pillar. As you can see, there is no articulation between the slabs and the pillars. Architecture is simply reduced to its minimum expression but as a support for a different kind of enclosure. When you see the domino, you might think, sure, he later said, here I invented the new architecture, the naked architecture, the architecture reduced to its principles. However, when he proposes the domino houses, he presents them, as you can see here, with an enclosure at the end that has this refined classicism. But look, for example, how these domino tiles, like the domino 6, are superimposed on the plan to form, in the end, this proposal that was his first idea for affordable housing to rebuild devastated Europe. And he creates what would be his last major project in Sud-Fon, a grand villa. Here, you can see that the classicism he had learned from Berlage manifests itself strongly. On one hand, there are elemental forms, the cube, half of a cylinder. However, there are still gestures that speak of the will to articulate with moldings, with references to classical architecture. It's still an architecture of compromise between modernity and classicism. But for this young man, Sud-Fon had given him all it could give. So, in the year 17, when the war hadn't ended yet, he goes to Paris. He settles there definitively, and much later, he would become a French citizen. But initially, he leaves Switzerland and settles in Paris. From Paris, he would embark on a new life. As we conclude this chapter, Le Corbusier's journey takes a transformative turn as he leaves behind the devastation of war and deploys his innovative domino system for affordable housing. His architectural vision, influenced by both classical and modern elements, sets the stage for his future endeavors. Join us in the next chapter as we explore Le Corbusier's life and work in Paris, where he continues to shape the architectural landscape and redefine modern design principles. If you like this video, click like and subscribe for more content. Thank you and see you on the next chapter.